This is the Great Vocal Majority Podcast. Hey everybody, I'm Tony Codispati, and this is the Great Vocal Majority Podcast. This is volume 57 that I'm calling Tragedy on the Pacific Coast Highway. Now, this story is so profoundly sad and tragic, it's hard to know where to begin. Under normal circumstances, adoption is perhaps the greatest gift one human being can bestow to another. In recent years, however, our culture has gone a little bit off the rails, I'd say. When the Supreme Court decided that homosexual marriages were legally valid, it opened a Pandora's box of potential issues. Not because homosexuals couldn't make good parents. Clearly, there are examples where they have. Rather, the issue is whether or not homosexuals can be assumed to be given equal status and consideration in adoption when compared with heterosexual couples. Said another way, let me try this on you to see what you think. Assume there are two couples, and one's heterosexual and the other's homosexual, and they're both hoping to adopt a child, and further assume that they are equal in every measurable way, and that's how the authorities assess adoption eligibility. Does society now believe there's no preference should be given to heterosexuals in adoption? Certainly, a stable home is preferable to an unstable one, regardless of the sexuality of the parents. I mean, we can all agree there, right? But what if there's no discernible or measurable differences? What then? Are we now going to say that there is no qualitative difference for the raising of children between heterosexual and homosexual parents? One isn't preferable over the other? In the absence of any long-term studies that are designed to uncover any qualitative differences, and assuming there aren't any, is a judgment that's not based in science, and instead it's based in a criteria that's far less reliable. To enter in such adoption arrangements without the benefit of long-term studies potentially places adopted children at risk. And as a country, I think we need to study these new marital arrangements over some period of time without the stench of politics or emotion infecting it if our true and paramount concern really is the welfare of these children. In the meantime, however, children are being placed at risk. And what's one such case where those risks were fully realized with tragic consequences is the subject of this podcast. Jennifer and Sarah Hart were a married lesbian couple who were also heavily immersed in liberal activism and the so-called social justice movement, Black Lives Matter, etc. They were strong supporters of Bernie Sanders, appearing with him on stage at a rally with their children. Jennifer and Sarah Hart were white. They adopted children in Minnesota in 2006, and then they three siblings, and then they traveled to Texas in 2009, where they adopted three more siblings. All these children, all six of them, were black. Between 2006 and 2009, the Harts and their children lived in Minnesota. A local newspaper up there reported that Sarah Hart had pleaded guilty to physically abusing one of her daughters, who was then just 6 years old. She reached a probation agreement in 2011. The very next day after reaching that agreement, the Harts removed all of their children from the public school, even though there were still a couple of months left in the school year. They did this because they were being exposed as abusers. The abuse was first reported in 2008 when one daughter told authorities her mother bruised her with a belt. The Harts lied about it and said that the child had fallen down a flight of stairs. While still living in Minnesota, the Harts traveled to Texas, where they adopted another trio of siblings. The most disturbing thing about the Texas adoptions is how they occurred after the Harts had already been questioned by Minnesota authorities and having reached a plea deal. They were already being pointed out as abusers of children, yet they were still allowed to adopt. And we don't know why the Harts chose to adopt black children. And one theory is that it related to the cost associated with adoption of black children, which are sadly less expensive to adopt than white children. Probably that's due to the number that are available. These poor children, though, were being seriously and serially abused but the authorities never took the children from these women. Why? Why didn't they? Was it the fear of a backlash from militant homosexual rights groups? Were the multiple complaints of abuse somehow not obvious? The Harts were only too happy to place children in the middle of danger. When the Ferguson, Missouri riots erupted in the aftermath of the Michael Brown shooting, and there were days of rioting and looting, the Harts were there with their children. Now, I have to ask, what kind of parent brings a half a dozen young children into such a dangerous situation like a riot? I mean, remember, these riots went on for days. I mean, something like 3-4 days. There were riots and looting. Why would you bring your children into the middle of that? And everyone remembers a picture of a young boy wearing a hat, hugging, in tears, he was hugging a policeman, pleading that there be no more violence. That little boy was Devonte Hart. He was one of the 6 adopted children of these 2 women. On March 26, 2018, California authorities believe Jennifer and Sarah Hart loaded all 6 children into their SUV and headed down the Pacific Coast Highway, where they deliberately drove off a cliff, Thelma and Louise style, killing themselves and all 6 children. 6 children: Abigail, Hannah, Marcus, Sierra, Jeremiah, and Devonte. First abandoned by their birth parents, then falsely given the promise of a happy and normal life by 2 lesbians, only to be abused repeatedly and horrifyingly murdered. Did the sexual proclivities of the Harts have anything to do with the death of these children? We don't know. I don't know. But we shouldn't be afraid to ask the question. That much we do owe these children, and that much we should do in their memory, because they're innocent victims. Especially Devonte, when you see how much he really wanted there to be harmony. His cry for peace and harmony still haunts us. For the Great Vocal Majority, I'm Tony Codispoti. Thanks for listening.